Shocking. The Queen Consort secretly boarded a jet to America without approval. But 30 minutes into the flight, a royal guard's voice broke through the cockpit, ordering the plane to return to Windsor. What he discovered hidden inside her. Diplomatic trunks stunned the entire monarchy. You won't believe what was at stake that morning. Watch till the end, smash like, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping royal revelations. The morning began with fog clinging to the tarmac like a secret refusing to lift. The air at Heathrow was thick with the scent of jet fuel and rain. By 5:40 a.m., the royal hangar glowed dimly under security floodlights. But something was wrong. The Queen Consort's aircraft, a sleek, pearl-white Gulfstream jet, had been moved out of its assigned lane. No official escort, no press clearance, no palace broadcast. Sergeant Rowan Annesley watched from the control observation bay, his gloved hands clasped tightly behind his back. He had spent 17 years serving the monarchy, 2 deployments abroad, 1 decade guarding Windsor's state chambers, and the last year as royal aviation liaison. He knew every procedure, every code word, every chain of command. Yet the screen before him showed something impossible. A royal flight logged under special humanitarian mission without sovereign countersignature. He frowned. The king's authorization was missing. King Charles was still convalescing at Sandringham after heart treatment. No member of the Privy Council had issued secondary approval, and yet the file marked, Flight Approved, Queen Camilla, Destination Washington, D.C., blinked green. Rowan scrolled further. Cargo manifest, 3 diplomatic trunks marked as heritage preservation materials. No inspection record, no digital screening tag. Exemption granted under a heritage privacy clause that hadn't been used since the late Queen's reign. That alone would have been enough to trigger review. But the attached clearance ID belonged to a division that hadn't existed for years, Royal Cultural Exchange Authority. Dissolved in 2015, he leaned closer to the screen. The authorizing officers' signature line read, For the Crown's Good Faith Mission, R.D. R.D. There were no officers by those initials in the aviation command. Rowan's pulse steadied. Something was off, and dangerously so. He turned to the communications board. The flight's radio was live, prepped for takeoff. The pilot, a trusted air service veteran, had signed the clearance 10 minutes ago. Rowan keyed into the internal line, voice low, precise. Tower to Gulfstream 771. Confirm sovereign clearance channel? The pilot's reply came smooth, routine, almost too casual. Confirmed, Tower. Clearance verified through Consort's office. Diplomatic priority load. Wheels up in 5. Copy that, Rowan replied, then muted the line. He exhaled slowly. The Consort's office had no authority to issue diplomatic clearance for foreign flights without sovereign co-validation. Yet here it was, moving ahead anyway, under the radar. And the rumors in the palace corridors echoed back at him now. Whispers that Queen Camilla had grown restless with restrictions, that she sought to expand her influence beyond domestic ceremonies, to speak on behalf of the crown in her own right. But even rumor had limits. This, an unsanctioned flight carrying uninspected trunks labeled as royal property, was not just rumor, it was intent. Outside, the engines thundered to life. Fuel lines disengaged. The escort convoy peeled back. Camilla boarded the aircraft with only her aides and a communications attaché. No press, no formal farewell. The doors sealed, and the jet rolled toward the private runway. Rowan moved from the observation deck to the control room. His partner, Officer Maeve Ingram, looked up sharply. Sir, that's her flight. Clearance came through 2 hours ago. Through which channel? Rowan asked. Consort's office, Humanitarian Sponsorship Fund. Who confirmed? Maeve hesitated. No one I recognize. External contractor tag. Rowan's jaw clenched. He tapped into the secure Royal Aviation server, entering his override credentials. A red notice blinked back. Access restricted. Heritage exemption in effect. Override code, Annesley 792. Reason: Sovereign Security Review. The system hesitated, then unlocked. The file expanded. Rows of encrypted contents, customs flags, and a final line under the cargo section. Case 3A, Private Correspondence. To be delivered to U.S. Consular Office. Sealed under consort privilege. Private correspondence? From a royal consort to a foreign government? That was more than irregular. It was unprecedented. Rowan's heart slowed to a steady, cold rhythm. He tapped the internal emergency line, the one reserved for royal continuity breaches. It connected directly to the on-duty coordinator at Windsor. "Royal Aviation Control to Windsor Command," he said. "This is an Inslee, confirming flight outbound to D.C. under unauthorized clearance. Cargo contains sealed diplomatic cases marked private. I request immediate confirmation from the palace." Static. Then a voice, calm but tight. "Command here. Negative authorization logged. No royal mission to America scheduled. Hold position and await further instruction." But there was no time to wait. The Gulfstream had already begun taxiing to the runway. Rowan made his decision. "No, I'll handle it." He reached for the master control override switch, something no guard had touched in decades, and keyed into the emergency flight communication line. The pilot's voice returned through static. "Tower, we are rolling. You're off schedule by—" Rowan interrupted, voice firm, carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "Gulfstream 771, this is Sergeant Rowan Inslee, Royal Aviation Command. Cease taxi immediately. Hold position." A long pause. Then, "Say again, Tower." "You heard me, Captain. Authorization from Windsor has been withdrawn. This flight is now under review. Power down engines and prepare for inspection." Inside the cockpit, confusion rippled. Through the glass, Rowan could see silhouettes moving, Camilla's aides standing, gesturing. Then the consort herself appeared briefly at the window, her expression unreadable in the mist. The pilot's voice returned, firmer now. "Sergeant, this is a diplomatic flight under the Queen Consort's signature. You have no standing authority." Rowan's next words were sharp, final. "That flight carries heritage property under false exemption. If you cross the channel, I will escalate to sovereign security control. You will not land in Washington. You will return to Windsor immediately." For 10 seconds, no one spoke. The engines idled. Then slowly, one began to shut down. From the observation deck, the tarmac lights flickered off as the plane came to a stop. Rowan exhaled once, eyes locked on the aircraft. He had just done the unthinkable, halted a Queen's flight mid-motion. And somewhere inside those sealed trunks was something that the monarchy was never meant to see leave British soil. By sunrise, the storm over London had broken into a grey drizzle, thin enough to blur the edges of the palace walls, but not enough to wash away the tension hanging over Windsor. The Queen Consort's aircraft had been escorted back to the royal hangar at 6:32 a.m., silently, discreetly, under strict order from Royal Aviation Command. There were no reporters, no photographers, not even a whisper to the press office. Inside the sealed terminal, the air felt heavy. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up alongside the halted Gulfstream. Sergeant Rowan Inslee stood at the base of the boarding stairs, cap under his arm, rain streaking across his shoulders. The jet's door opened slowly and Queen Camilla appeared, regal as ever, her face pale but composed. Behind her trailed her aides, each clutching folders and devices like lifelines. "Sergeant," she said coolly, descending one step at a time. "Explain yourself." Rowan didn't flinch. "Your Majesty, the flight was not cleared by the King's office, nor by any recognized council authority." Her tone sharpened, every syllable precise. "You grounded a Queen's aircraft midair. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Yes, ma'am," Rowan said evenly. "It means protocol still outranks privilege." The aides shifted uncomfortably. A thin smile traced Camilla's lips, but her eyes stayed cold. "You overstepped," she murmured, "and you will regret it." Before Rowan could respond, the heavy door of the hangar swung open. Sir Jonathan Mace, the King's senior private secretary, entered flanked by 2 royal archivists and a legal advisor. His voice echoed across the hangar. Her Majesty's cargo is to be opened and inventoried in full, effective immediately, under royal directive. Camilla's composure slipped for the first time. That is my personal property, she protested, stepping forward. Sir Jonathan's tone was polite but immovable. Then you have nothing to hide, ma'am. The inspection began quietly. The first trunk was unsealed under witness supervision. Inside, lace gloves, framed photographs, old ceremonial programs, harmless keepsakes. The second trunk revealed letters, but not ordinary ones. Each was addressed in familiar, elegant handwriting. Elizabeth R. A hush fell over the room. Rowan's eyes flicked toward Camilla, whose expression hardened into ice. These letters, Sir Jonathan said carefully, are part of the private Windsor collection. They were never authorized for removal from royal custody. Camilla's voice trembled, barely contained. They were given to me by His Majesty before his coronation. Given, Jonathan repeated softly. Or taken. Rowan's hand tightened at his side. He recognized the seals on the envelopes, the late Queen's personal crest. Reserved only for correspondence to foreign heads of state and senior church officials. These, Jonathan said, lifting one, are the Queen's private reflections. Posthumous writings meant to remain sealed for 50 years. How did they come into your possession? Camilla's jaw locked. You are implying theft. No, ma'am, Rowan interjected quietly. I am implying risk. She turned to him, fury flashing in her eyes. You dare accuse me of disloyalty? He didn't look away. No, Your Majesty. I accuse the people who sent you on this flight. The room stilled. Sir Jonathan looked sharply at him. Explain. Rowan tapped his tablet and projected the digital clearance he'd intercepted. This authorization was signed under a department that doesn't exist. The Royal Cultural Exchange, authority and dissolved in 2015, which means someone inside the administrative chain fabricated this clearance to make the flight look legitimate. The aides exchanged nervous glances. Find out who filed this, Jonathan ordered one of the archivists. But Rowan already knew. His voice was calm, almost too calm. The initials RD on the manifest. That belongs to Richard Denholm, the consort's senior communications advisor. Camilla's head turned sharply, eyes narrowing. You tread on dangerous ground, Sergeant, Rowan met her gaze. Dangerous ground is flying the late Queen's personal letters out of the country under forged clearance. Sir Jonathan turned toward Camilla. Your Majesty, until this is clarified, these documents will remain in secured custody. Her lips pressed thin. You will hear from His Majesty about this violation. You're right, Jonathan said quietly. We will. She swept past them, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, aides scrambling in her wake. When she was gone, Rowan approached the table where the letters lay. One envelope, slightly open, revealed the elegant handwriting once again. Only a few words were visible. If they ever try to divide the crown. He stopped reading, closed it gently. An hour later, Rowan was summoned to Windsor's south wing, a private meeting room where sunlight slanted through stained glass, and silence was law. The king sat at the far end of the table, still pale from recovery, but unmistakably alert. I have been briefed, Charles said quietly as Rowan entered. You grounded her flight. Yes, Your Majesty, and you opened the cargo. Yes, sir. The king studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You did the right thing, even when it looked like insubordination. Rowan's voice remained steady. The clearance was false. Someone used Her Majesty's authority to move royal artifacts beyond the Crown's oversight. If those letters reached the wrong hands, they would have rewritten history, the king finished softly. A silence followed, thick and long. Then, with quiet resolve, the king said, You will remain on restricted assignment for now. Not as punishment, but as protection. There are forces at play even I cannot control. He looked up, meeting Rowan's eyes. And Sergeant, if I fall, protect the truth, not the throne. Outside, the sky was clearing. The storm was gone, but something heavier hung in the air, a truth too dangerous to name, too fragile to trust. Inside her suite, Camilla stood before the mirror, her reflection still as marble. Denholm entered quietly. "The letters?" "Seized," she said flatly. "And the king?" "He believes the guard," she whispered. Then her eyes darkened. "But I believe the guard works for someone else." She turned away from the mirror, her voice low and cold. "If Sergeant Aninsley thinks he can protect the monarchy from me, he's about to learn how power truly works." By the next morning, Windsor was no longer calm. The courtyard's symmetry, the clipped gardens, the serene flags swaying in the wind, they all felt like a disguise. Inside those walls, a silent war had begun. The Queen Consort had been publicly silent since the aborted flight. No press statements, no appearances. But her silence was not retreat, it was recalibration. And those who understood palace politics knew that when Queen Camilla went quiet, someone else would soon be speaking for her. At 7 a.m., the first whispers appeared. A royal insider, speaking anonymously, told one newspaper that a high-ranking guard had interfered in matters of international diplomacy. Another outlet claimed a loyal palace employee had been unfairly accused of forging clearance documents. Within hours, online headlines multiplied like fire across dry fields. Did a rogue guard betray the Queen? Power struggle inside Windsor, military officer versus royal household. Camilla humiliated by false accusations. Insiders. Demand inquiry. Sergeant Rowan Aninsley read the news in silence from his temporary office inside the security wing. The screen flickered with his own name, his face blurred but recognizable enough to ignite a storm. He leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. He'd expected pushback, even anger. But this was something else. This was strategy. Someone had decided to turn the narrative upside down. And that someone, he knew, was her. Meanwhile, in the West Wing, Queen Camilla sat with her communications advisor, Richard Denholm, the same man whose initials, RD, had appeared on the forged flight manifest. The morning light hit her face through the tall windows, cutting her expression in half, calm and cold. "They're already printing," Denholm said. "BBC is holding the story for now, but the tabloids are running wild. The guard looks like a traitor. The public will rally behind you within the week." Camilla stirred her tea once, deliberately. "And the king?" Denholm hesitated. He remains quiet. But the Princess of Wales has been seen in the East Wing more often, advising him. That could change things. Camilla's lips curved faintly, almost amused. "Advising," she repeated. "She thinks she's his conscience." Denholm lowered his voice. "If the guard keeps his silence, the story stays in our control. But if he speaks," she looked up sharply. "He won't," Denholm frowned. "And if he does?" Camilla's eyes narrowed. "Then he disappears, quietly, respectfully, like so many who forget their place." Across the palace, Rowan's phone vibrated. A single message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "You are not safe. They have your clearance log. Destroy nothing. Trust no one." He knew the initial. Maeve Ingram, his former communications officer, and the only person in the aviation unit who had seen the fake manifest before it was locked down. He left the office immediately. The rain had returned, soft but steady, as he crossed through the courtyard toward the old signal room near the South Tower. It was there Maeve waited. In civilian clothes, her hood pulled low. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You messaged me," Rowan replied. "What did you find?" She handed him a printed transcript. Security log extracts from the aviation control server. "These were wiped from the archive this morning," she said. "Someone used the Queen's override code to erase everything linking her office to the clearance file. It's gone. It's like the flight never existed." Rowan skimmed the lines, his stomach turning cold. "They're rewriting the record," Maeve nodded. "And that's not all. Denholm ordered a personnel audit on you. Background checks, private communications, financial records, everything." Rowan closed his eyes for a moment. He had seen this tactic before, in Afghanistan, when men of power buried their mistakes by framing those who exposed them. Only this time the battlefield wore silk and gold. He looked up at her. "If I fall, make sure the truth doesn't." Maeve shook her head. "You don't understand. This isn't just about you anymore." She pulled another document from her coat. "It's about her." Rowan took the paper. His pulse quickened as he read the heading. Subject: Princess Catherine. Request for restriction of international representation. Author: Queen Consort's office. It was an internal memorandum, drafted 3 days before the flight. It proposed quietly limiting Princess Catherine's international appearances, citing health recovery and continuity of image. In other words, the consort wanted Catherine silenced too. Rowan folded the document slowly. "So this was never about America?" "No," Maeve said. "It was about control." That evening, the palace released an official statement. Her Majesty the Queen Consort's travel schedule has been temporarily adjusted for health considerations. The royal household is investigating misinformation spread by unnamed officials. Rowan read it and almost smiled, not with humor, but disbelief. The unnamed official was him. He turned off the television. In his quarters, the silence hummed like a loaded gun. He reached for his journal and began to write, "Day 1, they have erased the truth. The letters are sealed again. The press calls me a traitor. But something tells me this story isn't done. Not while the princess still walks freely, and the king still doubts the shadows at his own table." He paused, pen hovering above the page. Then he added one last line. "If anything happens to me, Maeve knows where to look, the letter beneath the crest." He sealed the page inside an envelope, marked only with the words, "For the king's eyes only." That same night, in her private suite, Queen Camilla stared out at the rain. The city below glittered faintly, indifferent, eternal. Denholm entered quietly. "It's done. The papers believe it was his fault. The guard's reputation is finished." Camilla didn't answer. Her gaze remained on the dark sky, her reflection shimmering in the window. Finally, she spoke. "You know, Denholm, there's something the late Queen told me once. Power never disappears. It just changes rooms." Denholm frowned. "And what happens when it leaves yours, ma'am?" She turned, her eyes cold but calm. "Then I'll burn down the door." But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her every move was already being documented, quietly, carefully, by the very man she had tried to destroy. And that one letter, the one hidden beneath the royal crest, carried enough truth to bring down everything she had built. The palace clock struck midnight, and in the heart of Windsor, history began to turn against her. The palace slept under the weight of a storm. Rain traced silver lines across the stained windows of Windsor as thunder rolled far beyond the hills. But inside the east wing, a single corridor glowed with candlelight. Only 3 men knew what was about to happen, and one of them had just been summoned in silence. Sergeant Rowan Annesley stood outside the king's private study, water dripping from his coat. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. Every rumor, every whisper, every fabricated headline had been a wound that cut deeper than any bullet. Yet when the page delivered the sealed note to his quarters with only 3 words, "By royal request, midnight," he came without hesitation. He took 1 step forward, then another. The chamber door opened before he could knock. Sir Jonathan Mace, the king's senior private secretary, met him with a nod that carried both warning and respect. "Your Majesty is waiting," Jonathan said quietly. Rowan entered. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of parchment and rain. King Charles III stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. His profile was outlined in the orange flicker of the fire, strong but worn, the face of a man who had outlived patience but not memory. "You've caused quite the storm." "Sergeant," the king said without turning. "Yes, Your Majesty." The king finally faced him, eyes clear but shadowed with fatigue. "The world believes you betrayed your post, that you acted against my wife, and yet—" He paused, his voice low, steady, deliberate. "I cannot ignore what my instincts tell me, that you acted because someone else already had." Rowan held his ground. "Your Majesty, I followed protocol. The clearance was falsified. The flight carried sealed materials belonging to Her late Majesty's archive." Charles nodded slowly. The letters. Yes, sir. Private correspondences, all marked under her personal seal. They were to be transported to a U.S. foundation under the guise of an exchange initiative. The king's jaw tightened. And you believe the Queen authorized this herself? Rowan's eyes flicked toward the firelight. I believe someone in her office convinced her she was protecting the monarchy by controlling its memory. Charles studied him for a long, unreadable moment. Then he sighed. You understand what that implies? Rowan nodded once. That the monarchy is no longer at war with scandal, sir. It's at war with itself. A knock broke the silence. Sir Jonathan opened the door again, and in stepped Princess Catherine. Her presence softened the room instantly. She wore a dark coat, her hair pinned back, eyes calm but alert. Rowan straightened unconsciously. Forgive the intrusion, father, she said, her voice even but resolute. You asked for truth. He's the only one who has it. Charles gestured for her to join them. You've been reading the papers, I presume? She smiled faintly. It's difficult not to when your face fills the front page. According to the headlines, I've conspired with the palace guard to undermine Her Majesty's public standing. Her tone was dry, but her gaze was sharp. She turned to Rowan. You have proof, don't you? He hesitated, then reached into his coat and produced an envelope, sealed in wax, marked with the king's crest. This is what I recovered before they wiped the archives. It's a printed memorandum from the consort's office, drafted 3 days before her flight. He handed it to the king. It outlines a proposal to restrict Your Royal Highness's international appearances under the guise of recovery optics. It also includes a signature chain, Denholm's, followed by the consort's. Catherine's expression didn't change, but her eyes gleamed with something fierce. So that was the plan. Charles unfolded the letter slowly. He read it once, then again. His hand trembled faintly as he set it down. Restrict my daughter-in-law, he murmured, and fly to America carrying letters written by my mother. All without my knowledge. He looked up, his voice cold now. This is not disobedience. This is deception. The fire cracked softly, a single ember bursting against the iron grate. Rowan spoke carefully. Your Majesty, I have reason to believe Lord Alistair Greaves assisted with the falsified clearance. His digital signature appeared on the secondary confirmation file. That ties him directly to the operation. The king's eyes hardened. Greaves, the same man who oversaw my coronation logistics. Catherine stepped closer. And the same man who has been quietly advising the Queen Consort on media strategy. Charles closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but edged with steel. We cannot act publicly, not yet. The monarchy cannot afford another open fracture. The world must see stability, not conflict. Rowan nodded. Then we move in silence. Catherine folded her hands. If we expose the documents quietly, through official audit, the truth will speak for itself. The public doesn't need to see the battle, only the balance. The king regarded her with pride, tinged by sorrow. You've learned more from this family than most of us ever will. Catherine smiled faintly. Perhaps, but he's the one who risked everything. She looked at Rowan. If you hadn't stopped that flight, those letters would be halfway across the Atlantic, and the monarchy would have lost its soul. Rowan inclined his head slightly. The crown doesn't need soldiers who stand taller, ma'am. It needs ones who stand still. The king's expression softened. And you've done just that. He reached for a quill, signed a small parchment, and slid it across the desk toward Rowan. Order of the Sovereign. Sergeant Rowan Aninsley is hereby reinstated to royal duty as Protector of the Sovereign. Archive. The title hadn't been used in nearly a century, a position that existed only in myth. Rowan stared at the parchment. Your Majesty, that role was created for moments when truth needed a sword sharper than ceremony, Charles interrupted quietly. He rose from his chair, steady but resolute. From this moment forward, you will report directly to me. No intermediaries, no council interference. And if the consort or her advisors move again, I want to know before they do. Rowan bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. When the meeting ended, Catherine lingered as Rowan turned to leave. Sergeant, she called softly. He stopped. Be careful, she said. Men who protect truth often end up buried beneath it. He gave a faint smile. Then I'll dig my way out, ma'am. Catherine watched him go, then turned to the king. Do you trust him? Charles stared at the closed door. I trust his silence. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The courtyard glistened under moonlight, but far across the palace, in the west wing, another light still burned, the consort's. Inside her study, Queen Camilla stood by her desk, staring at the news feed scrolling across her tablet. The official palace bulletin had just announced Rowan's reinstatement. Her jaw clenched. He's back, Denholm entered quietly. Yes, ma'am. The king bypassed council oversight. Camilla's reflection glowed faintly in the glass. Then we move first. Her eyes lifted toward the window, where lightning still flickered faintly beyond the horizon. If the king wants truth, she whispered, we'll give him one he cannot bear to face. And somewhere deep within Windsor's West Archives, another sealed envelope waited, one containing the Queen's last letter. A letter that spoke not of loyalty, but of betrayal from within. By the time dawn crept across Windsor, a strange quiet had fallen over the castle. It was not peace. It was the hush that comes before an earthquake. The corridors were lined with courtiers whispering about a midnight meeting no one had been invited to. In the royal kitchens, the staff spoke the king's name in half-tones. The consort's in, none at all. Inside her private suite, Queen Camilla sat at her writing desk. The window cracked open just enough to let in the smell of wet stone and roses. The letter lay before her, aged parchment, the edges browned, the handwriting unmistakable. Elizabeth Arrett had been found 2 days earlier, sealed beneath an oak box of the late Queen's personal journals, hidden in a compartment no archivist had ever catalogued. The wax seal had faded to amber, but the crest of the House of Windsor was still visible. Denholm stood by the door, uneasy. Ma'am, if what's in that letter says what I think it does, you understand what happens when it's seen. Camilla didn't look up. When it's read, she corrected, everything changes. Denholm stepped closer. The king will call it treason, she smiled faintly, her eyes still on the parchment. No, he will call it truth. Because it's his mother's hand that wrote it. She unsealed it carefully, her gloved fingers trembling. To my successor, whoever may wear the crown after me. If the balance between remembrance and control is lost, the throne will crumble not by rebellion, but by silence. The danger will not come from the people. It will come from within the family. Camilla exhaled. The ink shimmered faintly under the morning light. It was a warning, one she could now use as a weapon. Denholm leaned closer. If this goes public, it will imply that the late Queen foresaw this. Division. Camilla folded the letter once, twice. It won't need to go public. It only needs to be shown to the right person. Who? She looked out the window, where the Union Jack fluttered against the gray sky. The Archbishop! Let the Church remind the king what happens when divine order is questioned. Elsewhere in the castle, Sergeant Rowan Anninsley stood with Princess Catherine in the vaulted reading hall of the Sovereign Archive, the same room that now officially bore his protection. Dust motes floated in golden beams of morning light as the princess unfolded a leather portfolio. These are the digital reproductions of the recovered letters, she said softly. Every page that was meant to be sent to America now exists on 3 encrypted drives. One in Sandringham, one in Balmoral, and one here, Rowan nodded. We'll keep them sealed until His Majesty decides their fate, she hesitated. And if he never does? He looked at her, the weight of centuries reflected in his eyes. Then they'll wait for someone who remembers why they were written. She smiled faintly. You sound like her. He didn't answer. Because somewhere deep inside he feared that even memory could be rewritten. By afternoon, the king convened a closed audience in the green drawing room. Only 3 were summoned. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Sir Jonathan Mace, and Queen Camilla. The tension was palpable, the kind that bends time itself. Charles entered quietly, his expression unreadable. Camilla rose, composed as ever, the letter in her hand. Your Majesty, she began, her tone soft but deliberate. I bring something left behind by your mother. A letter meant not for me, nor for you, but for the crown itself. Charles motioned for her to continue. She handed the parchment to the Archbishop. He read silently, his eyes widening slightly at the closing lines. Then he passed it to the king. Charles read it slowly. When he reached the words, "The danger will not come from the people, but from within the family," his expression hardened. Camilla spoke again. "You see?" She foresaw this. The whispers, the divisions, the disobedience, perhaps even your trust in those who manipulate it. The king's gaze lifted sharply. "You mean the guard?" "I mean the ones using him," she said carefully. "The ones whispering in his ear and in hers." The silence was long, cold, dangerous. Catherine's name hung unspoken in the air. Finally, Charles folded the letter, placing it gently on the desk. "My mother's words were never meant to be used as prophecy," he said. "They were warning, for all of us." Camilla's eyes darkened. "Then heed it, Charles, before your house devours itself." He turned away, voice quiet but final. "It already has, Camilla. Because you brought the fire." That evening, Catherine found Rowan in the courtyard, where the sunset turned the stones to amber. She held a copy of the late Queen's letter, printed from the archive. "He saw it," she said quietly. "And?" He recognized it for what it was. Not prophecy, manipulation. Rowan nodded slowly. "Then she'll move again. Someone like her doesn't lose quietly." Catherine looked down at the letter. "And what about this?" He took it gently from her hands, folded it once, and slipped it into his uniform pocket. "This letter doesn't belong to history. It belongs to warning." As he turned to leave, she asked, "What will you do with it?" Rowan's voice was steady. "Guard it, like I guard the truth, but high in the West Tower." In the consort's quarters, Camilla stared out at the dying light, her reflection merging with the shadowed city. "You think you've stopped me, Charles," she whispered to herself. "But you've only reminded me that truth is a weapon, and I've just learned how to use it." In her desk drawer, another copy of the letter waited, not the one she'd given to the king, but the one she'd altered. A single phrase had been rewritten in perfect imitation of the Queen's hand. The crown must never bow to the weak. And as night fell over Windsor, a courier carriage rolled out of the gates, bearing that forged letter straight toward the Daily Chronicle. By morning, the monarchy's greatest lie would be printed in ink, and once again, the royal guard would have to decide, protect the family's honor, or the truth that could destroy it. By sunrise, Windsor Castle was under siege, not by enemies with swords, but by cameras, headlines, and outrage. Every television in Britain glowed with the same breaking story. Leaked letter from the late Queen suggests weakness must never rule. Did the late monarch warn against the next generation? Shock inside Windsor. The letter that could shatter the crown. The photo of the forged letter was everywhere, splashed across tabloids, plastered on digital billboards, dissected by analysts who had never set foot inside the palace. And the words, "The crown must never bow to the weak," echoed across the nation like a challenge. Inside the palace, staff moved like ghosts. Security gates were sealed, phones confiscated, and the press office flooded with statements that said nothing and explained less. Sergeant Rowan Ninsley stood before a window overlooking the flooded lawns, his reflection fractured by raindrops. The storm that had been gathering for weeks had finally broken. Behind him, Princess Catherine entered, her voice low but trembling. "It's everywhere. They're using the Queen's name to destroy everything she built." Rowan turned. "And the king?" She swallowed hard. "He hasn't left his chambers. They say he's furious, not just with her, but with himself." "He trusted too many," Rowan nodded grimly. "Then we take back the truth," she frowned. "How?" He reached into his coat and pulled out the original letter, the real one, still sealed under the late Queen's wax. "By proving this one never said what they claim." Catherine's eyes widened. "But if you reveal it now, then I risk my post, my life, and every oath I ever swore," Rowan finished calmly. "But if I don't, history will call her words a curse instead of a warning." At 9:15 a.m., a crisis council convened in the Maple Room, a chamber reserved for national emergencies. The king sat at the head of the long oak table, eyes dark, voice measured. "The world believes my mother despised her heirs," he said quietly. "That is not her legacy. That is my failure to protect it," Sir Jonathan Mace spoke first. Majesty, we can issue a denial. No, Charles interrupted. Denials are for the guilty. We need proof. Catherine glanced at Rowan, who stood near the window, silent but resolute. We have it, she said softly. All eyes turned to her. Rowan stepped forward and placed the real letter on the table. This is the document Her late Majesty wrote. Authenticated by seal and fiber match. I recovered it before the consort's aides could access the archive. Charles stared at him. You kept it, Rowan nodded once. I kept it safe. The king unfolded the letter, reading in silence. The room was so still that even the ticking of the clock seemed to hold its breath. Then he spoke. If the balance between remembrance and control is lost, the throne will crumble not by rebellion but by silence. He looked up slowly, not strength, not weakness, silence. The archbishop exhaled sharply. That changes everything. Charles straightened. Then we expose the forgery publicly, not through the press, but through the crown itself. Catherine smiled faintly. A royal broadcast, the king nodded. Exactly. The truth, from the throne, not the tabloids. Hours later, the palace's great hall transformed into a live broadcast studio. Lights glowed softly against the red and gold drapery. The Union Jack stood behind the king's desk, and beside him, for the first time in weeks, the Princess of Wales. Queen Camilla was nowhere to be seen. In the control room, Rowan watched the monitors as the countdown began. His pulse was steady, his stance unwavering. The broadcast light blinked red. The king began to speak. My mother believed the monarchy's strength lies not in authority, but in remembrance, in the duty to truth above all else. Recent words attributed to her, words of division, were never hers. They were the work of deceit, and to those who forged them I say this, the crown is not a shield for ambition. It is a mirror for character. He lifted the original letter, showing it to the cameras. This is her hand. This is her heart. And this is her legacy. The image spread across the world in real time. Millions of viewers watching the king defend not power, but integrity. And for the first time since the chaos began, the tide began to turn. But in the West Wing, behind a locked door, Queen Camilla watched the broadcast unfold on her private screen. The fury on her face wasn't loud. It was cold, calculated. Denholm entered, hesitant. Ma'am, it's over. The forgery's exposed. The press has turned. She said nothing. Just watched as the king finished his speech, the princess smiling softly beside him. When the screen faded to black, she rose slowly. No, Richard, she said at last. It's not over. It's only begun. She crossed to her desk and opened a small drawer, revealing a silver flash drive. The same one that contained months of internal palace recordings. Conversations, documents, even intercepted correspondence. Truth, she whispered. Let's see how much of it they can survive. Outside, the storm cleared. The flags above Windsor lifted in the wind again, the sky breaking open to sunlight. Rowan stood in the courtyard, his hands clasped behind him, eyes on the sky. Catherine approached quietly, standing beside him. It's done, she said softly. For now, he replied. She looked up at him. You know she won't stop, he nodded. Then neither will I. The sound of the distant church bells rolled across the grounds. The crisis had passed, but the war for truth had only changed form. Catherine turned to leave, but paused. Sergeant, she said gently, if the monarchy survives this, it'll be because someone remembered what duty meant. Rowan smiled faintly. And what does it mean, ma'am? She met his gaze. It means standing still, even when the crown trembles. He watched her walk away, the gold light catching her hair, the palace rising behind her, a symbol not of perfection, but of endurance. As the sun set over Windsor, Rowan reached into his coat and felt the weight of the real letter, now sealed again, its wax unbroken. The danger will not come from the people, but from within the family. He looked back toward the castle, its towers glowing in the fading light. Not this time, he murmured. Not while we still stand guard. And with that, the royal guard turned toward the gates, ready for whatever truth would come next. If you believe truth still has protectors, hit like, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe, because the next chapter of loyalty, betrayal, and redemption is coming soon.